Good morning to everyone. We have 1 minute, so I'm going to do something that's really difficult for me to do,
Uh-oh.
is to be quiet. Everybody who knows me will see I'm going to be quiet. Leslie, take good morning. There, I'm going to be quiet.
Yep. Yeah,
If you know me, you know how hard that is.
in Tallahassee, where it's 1 hour earlier.
And my computer just said it's 11 o'clock a.m. So good morning, everyone. I am Luli Castro, Swiftland's Executive Director, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, The Evolution of Diversity and Inclusion, and today's presenter, Stan Kimmer. Stan Kimmer, founder and president of Total Engagement Consulting and vice president of training for the National Diversity Council, is recognized as a consultant and trainer with unique skills in employee development and career mapping, workplace diversity, specializing in LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and organization effectiveness and leadership development. Stan formed his own consultancy around these areas in 2010, following a 31-year successful, diverse, multifunctional career at IBM. He is active in leadership roles in dozens of community and civic organizations, including a volunteer instructor on his church denomination's leadership development faculty. In 2013, the Triangle Business Journal recognized Stan with one of their leaders in Diversity Role Model Awards. Stan received his MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business and a BS in Management Science, like me, from Georgia Tech. In his spare time, I'm super impressed to tell you that Stan trains as a competitive adult figure skater. Please welcome Stan Kimmer and enjoy his webinar. Stan?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And as I bring up my slides, I think Luli is going to highlight Deb so that for those of you who need the sign language interpretation, we'll see her near on the little bar of people on your right. She'll probably either be the first or second person that you see. So you can see her and her interpretation as I go through these slides. And I'm very glad to be with you all. So first, I'd just like to take a moment of stillness. I know we're all in the middle of a busy week and busy day, so just kind of erase everything else going on from your mind, kind of give your shoulders a good roll in the chair that you're sitting in, and get comfortable and be fully engaged in this session with me for the next hour. So Luli introduced me already, so I don't have to say much more about me. I also love talking about unconscious bias, and I'll be doing that next month. A little bit more about me is, yes, at the age of 59 with no experience, I decided I wanted to pursue my dream of becoming an adult competitive figure skater, and now I'm competing on the adult circuit quite successfully and really enjoying it. No matter how old you are, if there's a passion you have, give it a try. Never too old to try something new. I've been with my partner, Rich, for 27 years, and we've been childless until about a year ago when we got Harper. And I'm afraid Luli's going to come up here to North Carolina and try to kidnap Harper from me. But she's now our baby. And what I want to do is I want to learn a little bit about you as a collective group. And what I'm going to do is maybe take some notes so I can kind of reference some of the demographics of everybody on this call with some demographics I'm going to share later about the library profession. So hopefully most of you will be able to see these polls. And the first poll that I'm going to ask is, with what gender do you identify? So if you can click on your response and submit, and I'll give each of these about 20 seconds. And hopefully most of you will be able to respond. Very good. 77% female. And I'm really glad to see 3 people who felt safe about identifying as someone who's gender non-binary or gender expansive. And that is a really fascinating, cool topic on itself. And 16% of 7 of you are male. So thank you for sharing those results. The next question I have is, with what race or ethnicity do you consider yourself? And you can choose more than one if you identify with more than one race. And in this poll, 60% Caucasian, and that's it's going to be pretty close to like the population of Florida, and 26% Hispanic, which is indicative of the Florida area. But when I show you some statistics around the library population, there is not that high a percentage of Hispanic and Latina people in the librarian profession. 19% African American or Black, and a lot good 12% Native American, which is a real healthy number. So thank you for sharing that information. The next question I have is, what age range are you in? And so you have your 4 choices here. Okay, the 45 to 59 is the most prevalent, with 46%. Then we have 11% both in the 31 to 44 and the 60 and older. So thank you very much. And we have 3 people who are 30 years or younger, and I hope that you're enjoying your start as in the library profession. So that's 70% or 45 and over. So I need to keep that in mind when I get to, whoops, I never shared the result. There it is, when I get to sharing some statistics. And then the final poll that I would like to run by is, click any or all of these diversity aspects that apply to you. And if none of these apply to you, you don't have to click any of them, but share if you were born outside the US, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, if you're a parent, a person with a disability, or a veteran. And again, this is one where you can take one or more answers. Well, this is really exciting to see 40% of the people on the call born outside the US. And actually 20% being a member of the LGBT community is a really healthy high percentage. 5 people identifying with a person with disability, and a little bit more than half who replied parents. And that's a very important part of your diversity mix. If you have children, that actually has an impact on how you view the world, how you view life, and how you view your profession. So being a parent is an important part of the diversity mix that we have to make sure that we respect and realize that's there. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourself collectively with me. The agenda, we're going to talk about the intersectional framework of diversity, equity, and inclusion, some terminology, and we're going to do an exercise around appreciating your own diversity. And I'm going to talk about how diversity can connect to a library's mission. I'm going to share the compelling business rationale behind focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. and then encouraging you at the end to build your own action plan around diversity and a summary. And hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q's and A's. I like to always share with three different foundations. The first is heart, mind, and action. When talking about diversity or looking at diversity training, it appeals to your sense of well-being, to your heart, that you want to be treated with respect. So you should treat all others with respect. It also has to appeal to your mind. Why is this topic important for library professionals? And then hopefully going through a session like this will cause you to have some kind of change of behavior or action. The second construct is the two-lens view, that as we go through this material, look at it through your own personal lens as an individual, and then look at it through your lens of your job role as a librarian professional. So those two lenses. And then third, thinking about where are you on this diversity spectrum. Change agents are those who are on the front lines of diversity work. They're very active, they're very vocal. Active supporter, you understand diversity, you embrace it, you take action. Some people are neutral, they've never given it much thought. And I'm going to go to the bottom, deliberate offender. These are people who are anti-diverse and like to get a rise out of others by saying and doing the wrong thing on purpose. And hopefully, if you have people like that on your staff, they get counseled once, and then after that, they should be fired. There's no place for that, in the professional world. I say naive offender for last, because we can all temporarily be naive offenders with communities or people we're not familiar with. We could have the best intentions, but accidentally say the wrong thing or use the wrong word that insults somebody without meaning to do that. And so even all those of us who are change agents, there are times when we can be naive offenders. And I want to share the concept of leave no one behind. Some of you might be diversity professionals yourself. You might be experts in diversity. And you're going to be hearing some of this and saying, oh gosh, I know all this already, But we need to respect that there are many who are different places in their diversity journey. And so some people need to hear the basic information. So for those of you who are pretty advanced, be patient and look for something new. Open your mind to learning a new insight, even if you feel you might know everything around diversity. We're going to start with some basic concepts around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and talking about some definitions of those words. And the purpose of this discussion is that when those three intersect in the best way, you create a culture of belonging, because that's where you want to get to at the end of the day. You want every employee who works in your library to feel like this is the job I belong in, and this is the place I belong. And you want all of the people that come to your libraries or that use your library to say, I belong here in this library. This is a place where I belong. So diversity theories, before we go into the definitions. Many of you probably in junior high history learned about America, the Great Melting Pot. People came from all these different countries and we all merged together to create this new culture. The problem with the melting pot theory is it denies diversity. It purports monoculturalism, that everyone is supposed to assimilate into the dominant culture. So it rejects difference and is a belief of the superiority of the dominant group. A more modern theory is the salad bowl theory. A salad is an entity, it is one thing, but the individual components do not lose their individuality. So it's acceptance of, appreciation of, celebration of similarities and differences. There's even a newer theory that I think is probably pretty accurate, the chicken soup model, which is a combination of both, that you can look at, a diversity of a group as chicken soup, where there's components of all of us that merge to create the broth or the kind of the cultural norms, but still each component of this chicken soup does not lose its individuality. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? Diversity are the characteristics that make individuals and groups unique and different from each other. And it includes our identity markers, things that we have no control over. And I'm going to show you a big mix of diversity things. It includes our personalities, our ways of thinking, ideas, perspectives. Inclusion is then actions to create an environment in which everyone is and feels welcomed, respected, valued, and supported to fully participate. And I believe I even created a handout uh, that is sent to everybody who's participating in this session, or that the slides will all be sent out so that you're going to have all this information. Now what I want to do is we're going to do a little exercise, and we're going to start this exercise on our own. And then I'm going to put us into little breakout groups of like 3 people. So what I want you to do is look at this wheel, and we'll be thinking about these different dimensions of diversity. Primary are those things you have no control over. Secondary are major decisions you made in your life or how you were raised. You know, if you joined the military, if you're married or not, if you have children or not. Organization is your role in your organization. You know, are you a manager? Are you an individual contributor? How long have you been there? You know, and then your personality style. I'll go to the very bottom in the blue. Flexible or structured. Some people thrive in a flexible structure, in a flexible environment. They don't like structure. Some people love structure and they do very well with structure. Going up to the right, are you more of an individualist or more about it's all about the team? Personal space. You know, do you love to be hugged and touched, or do you like people to respect your personal boundaries? So what I want you to do is look at this wheel for about 20, 30 seconds. And I want you to think about 2 areas on this wheel, anywhere on this wheel, where you are different or unique from the rest of the people on your team where you work. So look hard. Two, and it could be anywhere it could be in the red, the green, the purple, or the blue. But pick 2 areas where you are different or unique from everybody else you work with. Will you think about that for a few seconds? And if you have the handout that was sent with this session, all of the words that are on this, if you can't see the words on this circle, they're all on Appendix A at the very last page. It's in bigger print, so you can actually look at your handout and find them there. Now, once you've thought of those 2 areas where you're unique or different, I want you to choose one of those and think about what special insight does this difference give me in either working with my coworkers or serving the people that use my library. So, you know, think about that one difference you have and what special insight or skill does it give you in working with others, either internally or externally. So think about that for a second. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put you in little breakout rooms, maybe with 2 or 3 people. And I want you to quickly share, you know, your 2 areas of difference, and then the one that you chose, and the special insight that it gave you. So think of, you know, so those 2 questions, you know, your 2 differences and the one that you chose, and how does it kind of give you something special in terms of the work that you're doing? And maybe each try to share like for 1 or 2 minutes in your little breakout room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bunch of breakout rooms, and you're going to be getting an invitation that you click on, and then that will put you into a room with maybe 2 or 3 other people to have this discussion. Okay, I actually meant to give a 2-minute warning, but I pressed the wrong button and I ended the rooms like 1 minute early. So I apologize if everyone did not get a chance to share in their group. Going back to the presentation, kind of discussion and reason I do this exercise is I want you to be thinking in the back of your minds, what could be the impact of every person at your library or your organization could positively leverage their diversity? And you might feel free to even share a few words in the chat box. And I might go ahead and mute everybody now, just so good to stop any feedback. But feel free to share, in the chat and answer to that question. What could be the impact if every person, at your library or organization could positively leverage their diversity? And I love doing this exercise because when each person can appreciate their own diversity and see the value they bring to their workplace through their diversity, it makes it much easier for them to appreciate and understand everybody else's diversity. Now, the discussion around diversity is ratcheting it up. That's what we call that the evolution of diversity and inclusion. That the discussion around equality has been moving to equity, and the discussion around inclusion has been going up a notch to belonging. So let's talk about what the difference is between equality and equity. Equality is one of those great American values that people love to talk about. And it is important that all human beings have equal worth. So we're all equal in that sense. But equity recognizes that people have different advantages and disadvantages in their life, and that sometimes you have to provide, some special tools for those to equal the playing field. So on the picture on the left, all these three guys are being treated equally. They all have one box to stand on. But unfortunately, the shortest guy is not able to see over the fence. Equity means providing people the resources so that everybody can achieve their best. So in this case, the tall guy doesn't need a box. The medium-sized guy just needs one box, and the shortest guy needs two boxes. So you're changing the resources so that all three now can equally enjoy the ball game. Another example is if you have an employee who is blind and they're not able to see a normal computer screen. So that person can do their work. You're going to buy them or provide them special computer equipment that might enlarge the words on the screen or translate words to spoken language. You do not have to treat every employee equally and buy every employee that same piece of equipment. Only that one person who needs it. And then a discussion about moving to belonging. Diversity is a fact of life. Our country and our communities are increasingly diverse. Inclusion means everybody is there at the table, but now we're taking it one more step. Not only are we saying that everybody is at the table, but everyone is truly heard and truly valued. That's what belonging is about. And the diversity field continues to evolve. 30, 40 years ago, it was all about gender and race. That was the definition of diversity. And gender and race discussions are extremely important. And we need to continue to focus on racial and gender diversity. But now we're talking about generational diversity and all the different age groups working together, global multicultural and religious diversity, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, diversity of thought. 5 people that might look alike might have very different ways of thinking and processing information. More veterans, people with disabilities. And the discussion about diversity is going beyond recognizing that it's there, but how can we leverage diversity to be a strategic competitive advantage? And then finally, the concept of intersectionality, that you just can't look at one person and think of them in one diversity dimension, because everyone is a complex mix of all the different parts of their diversity identities, some that give them relative power and privilege, and others that give them marginalization. Then it's important to tie this discussion around diversity and inclusion and maybe look at your own library. Find your own library missions, vision, and purpose statement and think, how is diversity, equity, and inclusion a thread across our mission and vision? So here are some examples. Oak Bay High Library. Our library offers a welcome and supportive environment, ensuring, that students graduate as competent and ethical users with strong intellectual curiosity. But think about, how does diversity flow through that? This one from Tuscaloosa City Schools, in terms of, of supplying a space where ideas can meet through students and teachers and inspire individuals of any kind, that's diversity, of any kind, to be an active and contributing member of society. William Byrd High School, very short statement, but skills to adapt and thrive in a changing global environment. And actually, there's the source from where these mission statements are found. There's like 50 of them in there. A couple others. Here's some community libraries. Toronto provides free and equitable access. I love that they even use the word equitable. Welcoming and supportive environment, the last phrase. San Jose Public Library enriches lives by fostering lifelong learning and by ensuring that every member of the community has access to a vast array of ideas and information. And here's Trent Lakes Public Library. Again, provide all residents with impartial and inclusive access. So, check out your own statement and look at how diversity, equity, and inclusion flows through it. Then we need to look at the business case. By 2040, the US is projected to be a minority majority country, that the number of Black, Asian, Hispanic, and multiracial people in the US will be more than the white people. And so think about, what does that mean for your future talent, your future employees, your future library users are going to grow more and more diverse. And then we look at Florida. Maybe a little bit more than 50% are white, but a very second largest population is Hispanic, followed by a pretty good number of Black residents, and a little bit Asian and multiracial. And you see that over 20% of people living in Florida right now were born outside the US. Then we can look at the Metro Fort Myers area, a little less than 50% white. Very, very large segment of both Black and Hispanic. So you're already, Fort Myers is already a minority majority metropolitan area. And what I want to do is look at the ethnicity of the US as a whole, Florida and Fort Myers, and you can kind of see, kind of the nuances and the differences in terms of, where there might be a little bit over or underrepresentation, in Florida and Fort Myers. Then what's cool is to look at the ethnicity and the age range of people that are in the library profession. And there's the credentialed librarians and librarian assistants. And you see there that in credentialed librarians, that the population is much more heavily white than the population of the US. Now in Florida, I was glad to see those people on the call. You have a much more diverse set of people that are on this call today than the population. But then you look at, Hispanic, severely underrepresented. In terms of credentialed librarians, it's like 2% compared to almost 20% of the population, and a little bit less, not as far off with Black and Asian. What's very interesting is that 58% of librarians are 45 and over. On this particular session, 70% of you are 45 or over. So this group here on the call is a little bit older than the national data around librarians. So this is kind of cool to compare this data to the people that are on today's call. And very importantly, the foreign-born population of the US continues to increase. If you look at the blue line, this is the percentage of people who are living in the US who were born outside the US. Since 1970, it has gone up every decade. And I think that when we see the 2020 numbers published, it's going to go up again. And now we have 40 million people living in the US who are born outside the US. That's going to have a ramification on your librarian employees and also the users of your libraries. And now let's look at the business case. And we're going to go through each of these one by one. You overlay the changing demographics and this global economy with wanting to bring in the very best employees. You want to hire the best people in your libraries. So you want to have the widest, biggest, largest, diverse set of people that you're recruiting from. And then when you bring in diverse people, you want them to want to stay and thrive and grow. That when you have a diverse team, you can use that diverse team in thinking about what products and services is our library offering to our users. And you can use your diverse people to help input into that. And then you engage with the community at large, and you can use your diverse employees, and then reaching out to the diverse users that you serve. So we'll go one by one. The recruiting, that's the first one. That you want to find the very best possible people and have the widest possible of unconscious bias recruiting to bring in that best talent. That when you have strong diversity and inclusion, you're creating this wonderful, motivating workplace where people are going to be motivated to do their best. Studies show that diverse, well-managed teams outperform and deliver better results than their homogeneous peers. And then when you're building a strong employer brand of having a great diverse team, people are going to want to stay in that exciting, vibrant environment that you have. But you can recruit all this great talent and they might leave. 3 different studies show that women often leave jobs faster than men, that people of color leave jobs faster than white people, and that LGBTQ people leave jobs faster than their straight peers. And they often cite being treated unfairly or minimalized in the workplace as their reason for leaving. So when you bring in diverse talent, you need to create an environment where people feel like they are really valued and that they can grow, and that promotions are really done based upon merit and not being, one of the manager's favorite people or like the manager. And you need to look at teamwork and what causes people to stay or leave. The 2 most important relationships in the workplace are people's coworkers and their direct supervisor. So you could be like the head administrator of your entire library and saying the right things about diversity. But if your people are not treating each other well and with respect, that's the relationship that causes people to leave. That you need to provide good, robust diversity training to every employee so they treat each other with respect and people are not going to leave because they don't feel part of the team. Then you can use your diverse people as conduits to your larger community and engage your diverse employees in your community relation activities. And finally, bringing in ideas in terms of looking at people's diversity and what they can bring in terms of designing your services and your offerings. And 2 examples I give is Ford Motor Company. When they were designing a minivan, they made sure they had women engineers that had children on the design team, so they could bring their life experience of hauling kids around in cars and vans to their design, and that you can use the life experiences of people in your libraries to help with your library work. And then a negative example, several years ago, I went to Gay Pride in Atlanta with my partner, and we were not allowed to be married at the time. And there was a timeshare that were collecting names to invite people to go to timeshares so they could put on their sales pitch. And they had a form to fill out. And the form said, check the box, married, widowed, singled, or divorced. What box do I check? I'm certainly not single, but I'm not married. And if they had run that form and showed it to some of their LGBT employees, they could have told them, you need to add another box there for like partnered or in a relationship. So they could have used their diverse employees to help design the form. And they actually, they left with a bad impression. People at Gay Pride did not have a good impression of that timeshare company because they did not understand our community. And then you look at the growing buying power of all these different constituencies in terms of companies that are selling or collecting revenue, that there is huge buying power among all the diverse groups. And one thing that you might want to look at is the American Library Association. They have a lot of useful resources around diversity that you can access. So, you might want to do some own research if you haven't already and go explore the resources that the ALA has. Gosh, am I getting close to, yeah. I went through fast. We're gonna have lots of time for Q's and A's. And I usually do that. I usually finish a little bit early so we can have some interaction. And when we get to the Q&A time, you can either raise your hand or come off mute or either type it in the chat. But what I want to do here toward the end is encourage you all to think about building an action plan. To commit to learn about an aspect of diversity that you may be less familiar or comfortable with. And you might want to look through the materials and say, here's a group that I'm maybe a little bit not knowledgeable about, and I'm going to do some research. And then next month, I'm going to be back with you and doing a session on recognizing and mitigating unconscious bias, because we don't know what we don't know. And unconscious bias is the major derailer of fully appreciating and executing diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's often unconscious bias that holds us back. And then not only your personal action plan, but you need to build an action plan for your particular job role at your library. And I wrote one down here. Maybe check out the ALA diversity information and see what recommendations it might have that you could use at your library. And then you can add some other actions, to your action plan. So I really encourage you, to take action on some of the material that I presented today. So in summary, before we get to questions and answers, is diversity, equity, and inclusion is now one of those most critical areas that's impacting all aspects of society and our work in libraries. That diversity does encompass limitless combinations of diversity attributes. Every single person is a unique combination of their diversity attributes. The demographics of our nation, Florida, and your locations continues to change and become more diverse. That our libraries are a key component in advancing inclusion and understanding of all in our increasingly diverse society. And I do need to pause and say one thing I forgot to say earlier that I can say in the summary is that often it is underserved parts of our community that access and need to use our libraries for like internet access or for resources. So I might say that in many cases, our library users might even be more diverse than society as a whole. And also a lot of LGBTQ people, especially teenagers who might feel like thrown out of their houses or around schools that aren't open and accepting, will find libraries as a place of refuge where they can do research around being LGBTQ. So, you know, the work that you're doing in the libraries are a key component in advancing inclusion and understanding of the increasingly diverse society we're living in. And each of us should commit to both personal and professional action to grow in our understanding and execution of DE&I. So I will now stop sharing. And see if there's questions that anybody would like to ask at this time. You can feel free to come off mute. I'm not able to see, I don't really see if I can do this. See the whole gallery. Yeah, I can look at the whole gallery and try to look for hands. If people want to raise a hand, then I can call on you. Or you can take yourself off mute and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat. Is this a quiet group? And thank you for some of the positive comments. And I welcome questions on any of this material or even questions about my own journey if you would like to ask them. I know it's a lot of information to absorb. I'm usually pretty content heavy in trainings that I give. I'm not one for fluffing stuff.
If I may.
Sure.
Hey, so involved with a few DEI committees and whatnot around our university, and one of the biggest challenges right now is instituting some sort of DEI component at our library, the university library. And so how would you kind of go about that? What do you think? Like if, you know, you had like an administration that might be potentially reluctant to add like, you know, a regular DEI training, like what kind of response would you have, or how would you go about making the case that it's important, especially when the staff really want it?
Yeah, I think that's where you need to share this business case information with the leaders of the university in terms of sharing the demographics of our country and the students we want to attract are becoming increasingly diverse. You know, if universities are going to survive, it's not going to be upper middle class white kids anymore. You know, that, you know, right. In fact, right now, 60% of the Gen Zers are people of color and are diverse. And 15% of Gen Zers identify as LGBTQ or non-binary. And so the constituency that universities are serving is becoming more and more diverse. So it really depends, you know, so the university needs to say that, you know, for us to survive, we have to really get diversity, equity, and inclusion right. And then also in terms of the role of libraries and the university as a place of learning and teaching, that you're preparing the people that are graduating to go out and work in an increasingly diverse world where business leaders understand diversity and expect employees coming in with a diversity awareness. So you can, use some of the material that I shared to build that compelling business rationale that our survival depends upon getting diversity right, and we'll be extinct if we don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really love that section. It was something at a previous library system I was a part of where I kind of brought that up, and it was kind of, and this was years ago. So, but of course now climate has changed. And so I was hoping, to be able to be a little bit more confident in sharing this information with the library now. And I love the point you made regarding the students, because just as you said, of course I supervise some students here at the library, have a lot of student assistants, and the good majority of them do identify different pronouns, they, them.
Yes.
And it's real. I love to see it, and they're so, a lot of them are just so expressive and open. And I think that would be a great case to make regarding making sure that students have a place to feel safe, and that we are, gearing them up to live in a real world where people are diverse. And that, I like you also said that there are going to be deliberate folks who are against, diversity training and how they can deal with that. So lots of good points. Thank you so much, Stan.
Yeah. Glenn, may I ask what university you're at?
Oh, University of Central Florida. And we have
no way.
Yeah, way.
I'll tell you why I asked that. The National Diversity Council held our certification on the University of Central Florida's campus in Orlando. And one of your lead administrators did a presentation on the changing demographics of college students and why University of Central Florida has to get this right, and had all the data. And I was going to say, whatever university you're at, you need to connect with the University of Central Florida. So I'll remember, send me an email and I'll look up that person's name. I have it very deep in some files, and I can send you the name of the person who's from University of Central Florida administration who shared all those demographics and a compelling business rationale for diversity, because that can be the strong ally that you can bring with you.
So I was going to say, actually, the university as a whole is actually doing very well. It's our library that that we're kind of more slow going. Yeah, there's the opposite of diversity and inclusion. I'm curious if it was Dr. Kent Butler.
Yep. Email me later. We'll handle it offline.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay. Binary. I want to talk about this in terms of the use of pronouns. In fact, I do a lot of training. That's one of my areas of expertise. I'm doing much more training around use of pronouns. More people are now understanding that sexual orientation and gender identity are not totally binary. That when you look at areas of sexuality and gender, that anybody can fall anywhere in the middle of the spectrum. So now people are feeling secure about realizing that I don't identify fully as man or fully as woman, that there are people who identify either as a combination of genders or no gender at all. And people are getting more comfortable with this, because we are now getting in a society where gender roles are not as strict as they were, decades ago, that boys always do this and girls always do that. So people can embrace, being gender fluid or gender expansive or non-binary. Some non-binary people are fine referring to them as she or he and using the pronoun of their gender assigned at birth. But many more gender non-binary people would rather you use the pronoun they or them, because it's a genderless pronoun, and they don't want to be referred to solely as a he or a she. And so you're seeing a lot more prevalence of, people want to say, if you talk about me to somebody else, please refer to me as they or them. How can I approach someone and engage about difference without sounding pushy or insincere? One thing you might want to do is start with a discussion about them. Learn about that other person and their aspects of diversity. Just like that diversity wheel, I challenge people that, they're part of the diversity mix. Maybe instead of starting with, I want to share about my diversity, is, let me hear about you, and kind of affirm the parts of their diversity and how it's valuable. So that can help kind of open it up when you're like show more interest in the other person. That can draw them in and then make them more likely to talk about, you and your diversity. And that's why when I do diversity training with the general people, I usually do this exercise with the wheel, because if you get every person feeling they're part of the diversity mix, and that the diversity discussion is about all of us together are a part of diversity. Diversity is not dividing us and them. Diversity is all of us are in this together, and kind of using that approach and that language. Maybe time for one more question before I hand it over to Luli to give us closing comments.
I keep clicking the wrong things. I'm sorry. I'm so excited, Stan. Thank you so much for your informative webinar and for helping Swiftland revive our Diversity Discovery Institute from years ago, and this re-inauguration in such a wonderful way. Participants, as always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your friendly love letter from this listserv. Stan's next webinar, and I know you're all going to chomp at the bit to go register and hurry, there's just a little time left and a few seats, will occur on Wednesday, June 24th at 2:00 p.m. And it's called Recognizing and Mitigating Unconscious Bias. And that's the next step that we will be taking in our rediscovery of diversity, which is extremely relevant, not only everywhere, but especially in libraries because of the different communities that we serve. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a terrific rest of your day.
Thank you, and hope to see you next month.
Bye, and thank you to our wonderful sign language interpreter, Deb.
Thank you, Deb. Yay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.